Right, it's freezing cold, New Year's Eve. It's also my son's birthday today, but he's been tucked up in bed because he's absolutely shattered because he's still young. I'm absolutely shattered. I've got my beer ready for this one. This video will probably come out in a few weeks anyway, so you'll have all recovered. It is time to modify the truck that I said I wasn't going to modify and keep RTR and put a set of scattergun rails on it. I absolutely love the Northwest Scaler Designs Scattergun chassis. It is so versatile. And in fact, because I need my standoffs, in fact, I received in the post today aluminium versions. These are a special order. Corwin, who runs Northwest Scaler Designs, is an absolutely stand-up person. Really like him. I'm just going to see how much lighter these are going to make my other crawler that I call the Scattergun, so that needs a different name. Probably comment below if you can think of a name for that grotesquely coloured thing that now actually has bright blue wheels to match the green, orange and yellow paint scheme. So these are the steel ones. They don't fit on my scales very easily, so let's see if I can put something on to hold them. So the stock steel rails, and these are super strong, are 273 grams. These aluminium ones are 108 grams, so I'm going to shave 160 grams off, 170 grams off. That's pretty awesome. These are absolutely not going to go on the G500 because this thing has a 2-speed, a 3300 kV axe in it. Currently has a 12-tooth pinion, but seeing as I have to take the gearbox out, I am tempted to bump that up, even though it is already far too fast for its own good. We'll put those lovely aluminium rails away. So, if you've watched some of my other videos on the Scattergun, you might be thinking, oh well, I can't be bothered with a full-on competition crawling setup. That sounds like too much effort, doing custom links and custom this and custom something else. You're right, it's a long project, and the G500 was here to kind of keep me crawling while I was doing that project. Which, you know, didn't take too long, but, you know, it's been about 5 or 6 iterations. However, having a spare set of rails has had me itching to put them on the G500 for a while. So these rails are going to go on this G500 in its stock configuration. The only thing I'm going to need that's different are some... I'm using nylon standoffs, so these are sort of 10 to 15 mil spacers to hold the shocks onto these shock hoops, because you want a bit of space so they can still move. And then I've got some assorted bolts next to me and a couple of bits and bobs to sort out. I'm actually going to use these aluminium standoffs that I have left over. But anything that is roughly 72 mils wide should work. And in fact, I've just measured these just to make sure. I've got my Dremel next to me, and I'm going to be cutting my skid down. So this is going to be a non-reversible change, but if you use the standoffs, you can make it reversible. It just flexes the chassis more than you want. So yeah, they're 72 mil, and that's because the TRX components, the width between the two rails, is 72 mil. So yeah, wish me luck. It's not the hardest thing in the world if you've ever built one before, but if you've only ever driven RTRs, then this might be very different. Right, so here we go with the rails. As you can see, they are a flat rail. We're going to essentially do one side at a time. I'm not going to film all of it because it's probably not going to be too interesting. And I'm going to start by taking off the non-panhard side, and the light's not the best for this. We're going to start by taking off the non-panhard side because it's the easiest one to get off and gives me the easiest access. Awesome, catch you on the other side. Okay, so the first thing that's come off is the fenders, and I've chucked most of the bolts to one side because I'm not going to reuse them. The next thing to come off will be this, but I've left it on just to give everyone a tip. leave that on until you're ready to put your rails on, because that is the last bolts that you need, and you probably want to put these bolts on in the right order so they go back into your skid correctly. Now there's 2 bolts at the top that we'll probably not reuse, or maybe we will reuse, it depends. Probably going to have to trim this slightly, so I'll get a knife out and trim it. And then I'm going to pull this rail completely off because it's now only holding on this slider, and we'll put the first rail on. Taking all the bolts off, trying to get rid of some of the mud that I haven't been able to clean off because I can never get to this. All of these bolts are now off, so this rail should just pull off, and it's as simple as that. Now at this point you could, because you do get a bit of a bend in the rails, just bolt that rail straight on. And actually, because I've got standoffs and things, I think I'm going to do the non-destructive method first. Now 2 of these bolts are used to hold the slider on, which are these back 2, these 2. So I'm going to get this rail on, just get it on so that it will support its own weight, and then we'll start having a play. Oh, the fun of trying to get stuff to work while you're recording. Tell you what guys, I will pause the camera, just get bits on, and then come back to you. Okay, so we're partway through the video. I've struggled too much to do the close-in shot, so I'm just going to go back to my standard camera angle. I've had the Dremel out, and we've cut the tabs off the gearbox, and to give you an idea of the size of the tab, it's literally the sort of 2-3 mil deep, just so that it's all flat. Just brings it in a little bit. I've also still attached to all the electronics. I've also cut the side trays so that they sit flush with the chassis, and I'm about to pop this rail on. So they do have a specific way that they go. There's a sort of layback shock hoop at the front and then a standard one at the back, but because of where the position is, you can get some extreme angle on your shocks, and that's what I'm going for. It all lines up with the standard holes, so I'm just going to pop it straight on, and hopefully remember which one of these match up with the slider. So I think I can get away, because I've just cut it off, I think I can get away with putting the upper front link back in. I was struggling on camera earlier trying to get it in because it slots in from the bottom, and of course as soon as I've sort of said how easily it slots in, it decides to mess me about. Right, so these links go in a particular order, so you do want to retain the order of your screws, not links, because they go through and capture certain things. So one of them captures your rear upper link, and one of them captures your front upper link. So that's in there. The middle one isn't used to hold the slider on, so the slider can go on there. I'm going to have some problems with my receiver box, but I'll give that a chop in a bit. We'll just make sure that we get enough bolts in of enough of a length to make sure everything holds in. We are going with the stock skid, so not a huge issue. Some of these holes have got a bit of plastic over them where it's kind of, my cutting wheel, to cut plastic, I just use an old heavy duty cutting wheel for steel, and all it's doing is just heating up the plastic and melting it out the way. But because this thing does 20,000 RPM, it does that a lot faster than if I went at it with a craft knife. Talking a bit quickly as well, not sure. Probably because it's cold and it's helping me keep warm. Right, so hopefully we can just get that in the standard position. The scattergun gives you lots of link position options, so in the future I can mess around with this. However, for now, I'm just going to go with the standard ones. Just try and make sure that's captured properly. That feels a little bit loose. I'll look into that in a bit because I need the sliders to stop wobbling around first. I'm just using small hex drivers to just pull the holes into the right places. Because Corwin, who runs this, is a very clever guy, when you get them right, they just bolt straight up. So there we go. We are now stock sliders, stock battery tray, stock receiver, 2-speed box, 1 scattergun rail. Now straight away I can see that my front bumper position has changed. That gives me some options. So I have somewhere under all this mess, I have a brass front bumper mount. I do have an aluminium one somewhere as well. Somehow that bumper mount has got covered in some weird paint as well. Anyway, yeah, that bumper mount is brass. I've got an aluminium version as well that I have milled and played about with. I'm not sure which one I'm going to run just yet. Probably the brass one because of the heavy battery, but we'll see. It does put the weight quite high up because this does have a much higher bumper. And it is going to cause me some problems because the G500 has like a specific bumper mounting position. Right, I'm going to turn off the camera so I don't embarrass myself too much and get the other rail in. So the way I'm going to do this is get the front and rear fenders off, then do the same modification to the slider and the tabs on this side, bolt that rail back on, and then come back and talk about links and suspension and everything else. Cool, bear with me. Although for you, this should just be a quick jump cut. How's that for terrible continuity? Yes, I've taken my jacket off, got a bit warm, dremeling everything, but we now have rails on both sides. So 3 bolts on each side. I had a little bit of a challenge with one of the bolts, just wouldn't go in. Nothing major. Something that has caused me a bit of a headache is the shift servo, and in fact I've actually managed to lose the linkage for shifting. Ah, there it is. So I'm going to have to sort that out. My ESC I run on Velcro. I don't know why. Just easiest way to mount it, you sort of glue the Velcro on and off it goes. My light kit had to come off because I chopped off one side, but I can just hold it on by 1 screw. So I'm just now going to have a quick look at the shift servo. But essentially, yeah, the rails are in. It's using the stock links, so that's not a problem. I'm going to try and sort out this shift servo issue and then pop back. But yeah, no more cheesy editing or clicking. Right, so in order to make my 2-speed work, and I have just tested this, so hopefully I can get it back together, is I have just chopped a portion off it, although I've lost the piece I've chopped off. But essentially the 2-speed shift servo has 2 holes in it, and I've chopped off the lower hole after taking it off, and then I can mount that in the original position, in the original hole, but at an angle so it tips, and that should allow it to actuate that motion. So I'm just going to try and get it back together and we'll see how it goes. I've got the 2-speed working, so as I say, I've taken the servo mount out, chopped part of it off, remounted it, but it's like at a 45-degree angle to where it was. Had to change my endpoints because it's moved where the servo is, and it is a little bit wobbly, but I'm not too fussed about that. I'm going to pop my light kit converter thing back on, so that needs to go in, and then I'm going to talk about my battery tray, and my battery tray is a bit mad. Right, battery tray. Can you see there's a bit missing? There's quite a lot missing out of there. So if I bring it up to the camera, you can see I've kept a little tab, but otherwise I've chopped the whole thing out, all the way out to the edge. So I've got these plastic sides, and they stop the battery from shifting side to side in the truck. And then somewhere there's a really long Velcro strap that goes around the whole thing, and that holds my batteries in. Now, that will either hold in a pair of 2200 milliamp batteries, it will hold in a 2200 milliamp battery if you do it tight enough, or it will hold in these monsters, these 5200 milliamp batteries. And the great thing about this is it gets the weight really low in the truck, but I am going to mess around with the suspension, so I do run the risk of my rear diff bashing into it. If that happens, this might need to get modded even more. So what we're going to do is get this into the truck, because now we've got the servos and everything else sorted. Trying to find the right bolts and not drop them. It is New Year's Eve and I am having a nice beer. This is Brewdog Elvis juice, so I do seem to be dropping things all the time because I'm usually practically teetotal. I'm going to pop some bolts in the rear and then we're going to have a look at suspension. So let me just try and find some discarded bolts that I just chucked on the side, paying no attention to whether they go back in or not. And this will be the start of tucking the rear end in, like nipping that together. So with a flat rail chassis, they can be a bit bendy and a bit twisted, and depends what your skid's like, depends what the chassis is like. I'm going to probably need to double check this one. It seems quite wide and it's flaring out at the top, but that's why I've got these standoffs, because those standoffs, when you do your suspension together, correct that flare that it's got. Now the reason why this is twisted is partly because the truck's kind of slightly wonky at the moment, but also because it's been on a previous crawler and been bent into the shape for that. Let's do the suspension. So I was thinking about doing a servo on axle, but because I'm running the X500 that is such a big monstrous motor, I am not entirely sure this servo would lay down, although it might lay down. Probably help if I unbolted it, so I will just undo that servo arm. Steering steering rod, drag link, one of them. And just see if I can servo on axle this. And I think the answer looks like no, because it's going to smack into the back of the Hobbywing motor. But that's fine. This thing comes with a really, really good panhard system. And when I look at motors, maybe in the future, maybe I'll go for a smaller motor, maybe I'll change it. Could just get an old X540 now that they're superseded by the new ones. So if people are selling off their 540s, could get one of those. Just going to move my heater a bit closer as well because it is getting cold in here. Great. So, the easiest way to get things into the right places will be to do the panhard first. And this is where you start needing some custom components. Just turn off my transmitter so it doesn't start beeping. And by custom components, I don't mean anything particularly expensive. I just mean things like nylock nuts. So I'm going to run a crush washer and a nylock nut. Nylock nut for the grip, and the crush washer just to provide a bit of extra mechanical grip. Tiny dab of Loctite on that, and then find a bolt that looks like it will do the job. I'm going to go through the bottom panhard hole for now, just to get it all bolted together. Probably want something just a little bit shorter. I'm trying to reuse as many of the stock bolts as possible, so I'm just looking around for taken off bolts and things that are lying around. No, I guess I'll use this long one for now. Now, it looks like the stock panhard rod's a bit too short, which was to be expected. So what I'm going to do is get a different nylock, because I know this is going to go on and off quite a bit. In fact, I'm just going to put a normal nut on there. And then I'll come back and revisit that to straighten it up, and I'll show you how to straighten that up soon. Right, so I have my panhard bar on, and that's holding my front axle up. I'm going to mess around with my shocks in a minute, In fact, no, let's, right. Okay, so I have my panhard bar on the front. On the back, we're going to get these shocks sorted. Now, I'm going to run my shocks in the most lay down position I can get away with. And I will start with, you know, the most lay down position. Now, in this box, I haven't even taken the wrapping off. In this box, I have a load of nylon spacers. Hopefully 10mm spacers should be the right length. So grab some of the long nuts from putting your stuff on, run them through your shock, put the nylon on, and then realise that they're far too long and they don't need to be that long. Put them back, pick up a 5mm, pop that on, and then see how it fits. And that goes through perfectly, but still probably doesn't have enough length there. So I'm just going to find some longer bolts. They look nice and long. Is that a bit longer? It's about the same. Actually, that's not too bad. That's not too bad. So we'll go with that. Although I do have some slightly longer ones somewhere. Let's just see how long these are. There are a few threads extra. So yeah, some nuts and bolts and spacers are definitely needed for this kind of thing. I'm using countersunk just because that's all I have to hand. You can get your nylon spacer things in a different colour. Doesn't really matter too much. I might not even get to run these the way that I want to because it might foul on my low CG battery, but we will find out soon enough. So they've gone through, and they're going through the very first hole, so this is low, like my other scattergun, to get the centre of gravity, to get the centre of gravity as low as possible, but also to have the maximum articulation that we can get. Little dab of Loctite, then we get our 72mm spacer. Right, that feels nice and tight. That shock is not rubbing on the frame as yet. It will rub on those bolts that I've put on, but that's because I haven't actually done them up yet. Right, it's nice and tight. So we have our rear shocks mounted as low as possible. That is getting to the end of the travel of the shocks and then just touching the battery tray. So that's perfect. That's absolutely perfect, because that means that I can run my big chunky batteries. Now, if this battery still fits, I'll be very happy. It looks like it's not going to fit because that standoff is just in the way. So I'm going to have a think about that, because I do like how low those shocks are. Yeah, we'll come back to that. So we'll do the fronts. I've got my panhard bar on. That's the first thing I do. I'm just going to put my servo out the way, and then we're going to repeat the same process. Now, the Hobbywing axe has got that annoying sensor cable that's in the way, and I won't be able to do the, as you're looking at it, the left-hand side, or as you're behind the truck, the right-hand side, quite yet, because the whole thing's shifted off to one side because the panhard bar's not long enough. So I'm just going to loosen it off and try and pop it on the middle hole of the panhard mount, because it has three holes. One is offset from the others. That move across might move me across enough. If not, there's a little trick that you can do with links that allows you to get a bit of extra space. And in fact, with Traxxas links, because they use M4 links, you don't have to really do many tricks to them. You can just unwind them. Probably somewhere between about 6 and 8 turns each end. Each 2 turns is, I think, 0.8 of a millimetre, so it's not too bad. That's actually started to straighten up. It's still not ideal, but we'll see what it's like once we've got this standoff and everything else in. So I'm sure I had one here, probably knocked it off the table. Oh, there it is. So same thing, 2 long bolts, 2 very short spaces. You want the shortest spaces you can get away with until your shocks rub on the frame. And then just a little bit of space for dirt and debris. The reason for that is the shorter that bolt and that spacer, the less you've got to bend when you drive it like me and crash it everywhere. Now I'm sorry there aren't any close-up shots and everything else. I was struggling too much and I was about to chop my fingers off with the Dremel. So as we can see, hopefully you can see this shock here is getting compressed by that panhard. Well, it's getting compressed by the frame because the suspension is too far over to one side. So I'm going to take this panhard rod off and just play about with it. Okay, so the panhard bar. Just had to unwind it, so there was about 2 to 3 thread coils showing on each side. I've got my bracers on the front. I've installed my servo mount because while testing out this Traxxas one, I've realised that it's actually going to cause me some problems knocking against either the screw for the panhard bar or the motor itself. So standard servo in a Traxxas, servo horn points forwards. What we're going to do is make it point backwards, but we have a problem with the receiver. So the receiver box isn't long enough for that. So there's an easy fix. I'm going to pop off my receiver box and probably just bolt it back on the wrong way round. Or worst case, just give it a bit of a drill. So for now we're just loosening it off. These bolts are nice and rusty. And with that receiver box off, we can work on the servo. The servo, we're going to recycle the 4 bolts for the servo. I've already got it on a 2.5mm for this servo horn, so that's fine. Whoops, that is on tight. So the reason why we're flipping it is because we want the horn to be, even though it's reversed, it's opposite. If I just turn the servo around and reverse it, then the steering arm will be too long. And the great thing about these AGFRC servos is they've got way more throw than the Traxxas knuckles can handle, so I don't have to worry too much about getting the spline just right because I've got enough adjustment that it's not an issue. We have a servo on the front, we have shocks sorted, suspension's moving nicely. We're going to pop our drag link and steering rod back together. So the stock Traxxas receiver faces backwards, and I am flipping it round, and then it kind of nudges the sliders a little bit. Right, what am I going to have to do there? Yeah, probably just nick a chunk out the slider or just put a really long screw in. I think I'm just going to go for trying to get a longer screw to just kind of capture it and hold it down as best it can, rather than worrying too much about trying to get it to fit perfectly. Because it's only a receiver. I mean, this box probably weighs about 50 grams at best. So as long as it's somewhat captured. And in fact, yeah, so all I've done is flip my receiver box round. It's now at a bit of an angle, but doesn't weigh anything, so it's not the end of the world. That means all my cables fit. My shift servo might have an issue. That is pretty much it. I'm happy with that. So that That is a scattergun rail on a G500. The sliders are very flexy. They're not like the in the works ones that I'm running on my other truck. I think I need to have a little look at some bracing. I just need to see where links are going to go. So I think I can get an extra brace in there. So I'm going to do that now. And that will also help me with my battery situation, because I might be able to mount the battery a different way. So the first thing I'm going to look for is some of those standoffs to see if I've got any more that are roughly the same length pre-cut from the last time. So that is actually slightly wider, which should make this part easier. And what that's going to do is, the rails at the moment are wide in the middle and then they're sort of going in straight, and what this is going to do is help tuck them in so they're a bit more like stock rails. Just got to find some bolts that'll fit, some Loctite, and there'll be a bit of gurning as I try and force things around because the sliders are just a little bit in the way for this. There we go. Oh, and that one's stripped to thread. So we do what we did last time and find a longer bolt and jam it in. So we've got full flex on the rear, full flex on the front-ish. It's just bashing the 550 motor. So what I'm going to do, and I'm not sure how well this will get picked up on camera, is just place it down and then lift it up and just see how much lean I've got on the gearbox. I actually think I've probably mounted the rear suspension a bit too dramatically low. So I'm going to move that up. I'm also going to move the front up because I'm not sure if I'm going to get all of my travel. No, I am. I'm going to get all of my flex, but I'm not going to get all of my travel. But you don't actually need all of your downward travel, or upward travel, depending on how you view it. But because I've got them laid down, it might affect spring rates. So let's see how this goes. And also, because I've put that brass on and that servo at the front, I might take some of the brass that I put on to counterbalance the battery, but we'll see. By moving these as well, means that our big fat batteries can remain. So that's good. So it's not going to run as low as my other scattergun, but that's fine. This is a trail truck. It's going to be lower than a standard TRX and have more articulation, so win-win. Now what this has reminded me is the standard TRX skid is just weird. It's got a huge lump in the bottom that sticks out, and it's not a flat skid at all. So I'm currently designing a flat skid that does weird and wonderful things with the gearbox that I must remember to take inside so I can do some mocking. So I've got a spare gearbox here. That raises us a little bit, not too much, but now we're starting to get a bit more of a belly dragger kind of forward lean on it. Right, that's great. So now my battery fits in perfectly. I think that's where I'm going to leave everything. We've got a slightly angled down skid compared to what we had before with the TRX. But as I say, the TRX has got this weird skid that sticks out and sort of forward. So that's got flatter, which is nice. So that is a scattergun install on a standard TRX, and everything still works. So locking diffs, 2-speed. It's got an axe. It's set up to be very, very low CG, much flatter, much lower than a standard truck, but also to have a lot more articulation. So that's pretty cool. So I've got full travel there. I haven't quite got full travel here because my motor is just hitting my diff, but we're actually talking about 2 to 3 mil of travel lost at full travel. But if your truck's at full travel, you're probably coming down anyway. It's got full articulation both sides. It's got full articulation this side. The weight is definitely a lot further forwards now. Even with that massive battery, I can feel it tipping forwards, so that's great. Okay, time to fit the shell. It's really accentuating that forward leaning skid. I think I want to lower the rears, but I'm not sure I can. I think my brace might be in the wrong place. But that just means that I put the shocks on with a nylock nut and then mount that brace separately. So let's take a quick look at that. I can't really get that battery any lower. Just trying to make sure the chassis is not twisted because it's leaning to one side. It might be the panhard. I haven't extended the panhard enough, and I haven't. So I need to make that panhard a bit longer. Now I've sorted out the panhard bar and everything else, I'm just going to sort my servo out, and it looks like I've trimmed it up really badly. So first thing I'm going to do is just reverse the servo because the whole thing's been flipped 180 degrees. So that's great. So I think with the servo, all I'm going to have to do is just whip off the servo horn and just move it round by a couple of teeth. That is a scattergun. So the whole truck's leaning over to the left slightly. I don't know whether that's just one of the shocks has gone or whether the weight balance is a bit funky. I'll look into that another time, I'm not too bothered. I'm going to just try changing gear, so off we go. So I think my endpoint endpoints need a little bit of work, otherwise everything's fine. Right, our diffs are working, so time to get the body on. So the shell still fits, obviously, because we've not really changed that much. However, where it fits has changed dramatically. So it's looking nice and level and planted and ready to go. What we need to do is find a way to mount this shell. Right, well the temperature's dropped, so got my jacket back on, get myself nice and warm. I have got everything up and working. The micro servos are causing me a few problems, but that's actually, I think, because they're on their way out rather than any other issues. The car has been underwater in icy water quite a lot this week, so that might be why it's failing. So in order to get the shell to fit, what I've done is take the standard Traxxas body posts, I've drilled them and then put a standoff between them and a washer and a bolt through, and that holds the front on. The rear one is just zip tied on and it's got a bit of wiggle, because actually with these kind of shells, having a bit of wiggle in the rear posts is a good thing, because it stops you from snapping the posts off, so they can move about as it crashes, and because they're zip tied on, it's a cheap fix if they snap. The battery now fits, the suspension's dialed in. I did have the battery somewhere, there we go. Battery now fits in really well, really snug. It's got a standoff underneath it to stop it from slipping through should my strap come loose and the little tab break. But it's a nice low CG solution. The suspension on the rear is as low as I can get it, so it's the second from last hole, and the front is on the final hole, so the suspension is really nice and settled and low. I've gone against my own principles and put the ESC up high, but that's to try and get the weight to balance, because it was just starting to tip to one side. Because now the suspension's nice and soft through getting that extra alpha angle and getting all that articulation, the truck was starting to lean to one side. So that's sorted now. Panhard bar was just a case of unwinding a few things. I've got an extra standoff across where my motor is and the one underneath. So all in all, to do this conversion, you need a front-mounted bumper, cheap brass one off Amazon or eBay. Depending on how long you want to wait for the boat to arrive, it can be next day, and that will cost you about $25 or pounds. It's about equivalent. If you're happy to wait a few weeks or months or however long it takes for the slow boat to arrive, then they're as cheap as sort of £5-6, about $8-9. So that's it. So you need the front mount, some standoffs. I've used 80mm aluminium standoffs, but I've then chopped them down to 72mm. So you could probably, if you're going to do this conversion, probably just buy 70mm standoffs, because I don't actually have any of the TRX parts in apart from the battery tray, and you could just slice a millimetre off each side, or just bolt it up and just have a slight inward angle. A few bolts here and there. I think I've used longer ones on the front to capture into the standoffs, so they're about 30mm bolts, 25-30mm bolts on the rear to hold those standoffs. 5mm nylon spacers. My shocks aren't rubbing, they're very straight up and straight down, which is what I wanted. I didn't want them to be flared out. Yeah, bolts, nuts, some zip ties, and a front servo mount, and that will get you from an RTR to a scattergun. This now has a really huge forward lean, because the suspension's level, but the body looks like it's forward because the rails actually have an angle forwards, which is really nice. The Traxxas rails are flat in the belly, so the sliders stay flat, but because the sliders are mounted on this leaning forward thing, it's tipped them forwards. I could trim the shell and balance it out, but I quite like it. Looks pretty cool. I'm going to give it a good thrashing tomorrow, although you'll probably see this in a few seconds in the video, and just see how it performs. It feels a bit heavier, but that's because I've added extra brass, but it feels planted. It doesn't bounce when I drop it. It's quite nice. So the Traxxas oil, the stock oil, works quite well with the weight. I'm running a massive battery. That's like a 500 gram battery. Okay, been out today, had a lot of fun. A few things have just changed as I've got back. I've taken off the brass bumper, the diff and portal covers. They've all come off. I had a few problems with the 2-speed, and that was mostly down to the battery tray just interfering with it a bit. So I might pop on this awesome Northwest Scaler Designs battery tray. Not sure if the camera's picking that up, but that might go on the top. I think it just mounts on somehow, and we'll see how that goes. Otherwise, performed faultlessly. So happy with this truck, so happy with this chassis. Managed to do in the snow some lines that I couldn't do in temperatures that are about 10 degrees Celsius warmer, without mud, without problems. So that just shows the potential. There are one or two lines I couldn't hit, but with a couple of inches of snow, I'm surprised I even got to them, never mind tried to have a go at them. So yeah, absolutely love it. Try and build it without brass, put all your weight as far forward as you can, and just get out there and enjoy yourselves. Thank you.